Lucia, also known as the Night Emissary, is the third ether support agent in Zenless. With how few ether units we have, more are always welcome, but Lucia in particular distinguishes herself within the support role. Astra is focused more towards attacker units, being a generalist whose buffs are strong enough to be used in any team. Yuza, on the other hand, is decidedly an anomaly support, but who can still contribute even to other comps when push comes to shove. Lucia, however, is very strict with who she benefits, offering few bonuses to most agents, but being absurdly strong for Rupture units. The sheer value she brings to Rupture is so excessive that she makes a near 115 million HP Miasma Priest feel weaker than its 77 million version when it first released. And sheer is very much part of the reason why she's both so strong and so niche. So let's go through the buffs she offers and how her kit works. Lucia's total buffs to a team add up to 900 cheer force, 20% damage bonus, 30% crit damage, and a 5% combat HP increase. Given how sheer force and HP percent do nothing to non-Rupture units, you can see how she isn't all that good outside of such comps. Better than Pan, I suppose, since she at least provides some crit damage, but you really won't want to be running her outside of a Rupture team. At the same time, since sheer force has a 30% attack conversion, Astra and Yuza's 1200 attack would be 360 sheer force, so Lucia provides 2.5 times more sheer. On top of that, she provides as much damage bonus and 5% more crit damage than Astra, all the while giving 5% combat HP. And yes, that 5% combat HP does translate to an increase in sheer force for Rupture units, which means that her contribution isn't actually 900 sheer force, but closer to 1000. When we start factoring in other things like drive discs and her signature engine, her total bonuses get even higher, but we'll cover them later. First, we should go over how these buffs are split, activated, and maintained, as well as understanding Lucia's unique mechanics to get the most out of her. Lucia has 3 buffs: Ether Veil Wellspring, Darkbreaker, and Dreamer's Nursery Rhyme. Let's begin with Ether Veil Wellspring. It's this buff that provides a 5% combat HP increase to the party. When it's active, a slight tint will overlay the screen and the edges will fill with some special effects. This is a brand new type of buff, a sort of stage or area effect, so expect the mechanic to be built upon with future units. It lasts 40 seconds. No need to check the buff icon, it's pretty clear when it falls off. To activate it, Lucia must enter the dream state. This is the only way that the effect can be activated. If she enters dream state again before the buff has run out, it will extend the duration by another 40 seconds, maxing out at 300 seconds. This dream state relates to her core passive and the gauge underneath her portrait. It tracks her dream points, having a cap of 100, and once it is reached, Lucia will go into the dream state when hitting enemies with certain skills. When entering the battlefield, Lucia will immediately gain 60 of these dream points, and different attacks will generate a varied number of them. Her dodge counter, quick assist, and special all generate 20 dream points with an independent 5 seconds cooldown. So you can use one skill and then go into another, like a quick assist into a special, and get 20 dream points from both. But if you use the same skill over and over, then you won't get any more dream points until 5 seconds have passed. Only these 3 skills have cooldowns. The next set generate 40 dream points, being the 5th hit of Lucia's basic attack string, assist follow-up, and chain attacks. Then there's EX Special, generating 60 dream points, and Ultimate, which generates 100 dream points, instantly maxing out the gauge. If already in the dream state, it will have Lucia re-enter it immediately once it's over, but this effect cannot be stacked. I should mention that dream point generation is conditional on combat state, not hit state. If attempting to use them before a fight, you get no points. But as soon as you're in combat, it works, even if it misses. Since Lucia begins with 60 dream points and her basic 5 gives 40, that means that by spacing correctly, you can build a full 100 and enter the dream state as soon as combat begins. Now that we've covered how to get into the dream state, it's important to understand what it does. As mentioned before, it's how to activate the Ether Veil Wellspring buff, but there's more to it. Entering the dream state will trigger a quick assist. This and Lucia's ultimate are the only ways of getting quick assists with her. Unlike other supports, her EX special does not trigger quick assists, be it inside or outside the dream state. The dream state is also tied to the Ether Veil Wellspring buff. If it runs out, Lucia will exit the dream state, even if she's still got 100 dream points. You may also notice that skills do not generate any dream points in the dream state. In fact, many skills will consume dream points instead of generating them. For these, we need to touch on Whim and Harmony types. They are what's being referred to when I say Lucia needs to be at 100 dream points and hit enemies with certain skills to enter the dream state. Most of Lucia's attacks are considered either one or the other. Basic attacks, dodge counters, specials, and quick assists are all treated as being of the Whim type, while EX specials, assist follow-ups, chain attacks, and ultimates are instead categorized as being of the Harmony type. When a Whim type attack is used during the dream state, it will consume 25 dream points and be upgraded into a Harmony type, significantly increasing its damage multiplier. Special, for example, goes from not even breaking 100% in damage multiplier to being over 360. It also ends up looking a lot cooler, with the upgrade bringing with it aesthetic changes to attacks. Harmony attacks don't really get anything fancy going for most of them, they just don't consume any dream points when used. The X Special and Ultimate though do get some mild upgrades, being that using them in a dream state will extend the duration of Ether Veil Wellspring. The X Special increases its duration by 16 seconds, and Ultimate by a whopping 32 seconds. Don't forget it automatically re-enters Lucia into the dream state after it runs out. The other harmonies, namely assist follow-ups and chain attacks, don't do anything else during the dream state, not generating points nor consuming them. And that's a good thing. It is cool how Whim skills get upgraded, but using up dream points manually is something you want to actively avoid. This is because those dream points are far better spent on Lucia's Aftershocks. When in the dream state, when an active character's attack hits an enemy, she will consume 25 dream points to perform an Aftershock, summoning an ethereal to attack the enemy. There are 3 variants of this, which will be used at random. Tulahan, who scales with basic attack damage, Thanatos, who scales with special damage, and Thracian, who scales with assist damage. I do mean it when I say it's random. She can alternate them or end up doing the same attack multiple times in a row. These are significantly stronger than the upgraded Whim attacks, with all Aftershocks having a 1100% damage multiplier at level 12. There is a cooldown on Aftershocks, being 8 seconds, however this cooldown is shared with the Whim to Harmony enhancement. To quote the description, after Lucia triggers a skill upgrade or Aftershock, Aftershock cannot be triggered again for 8 seconds. What this means is that once an Aftershock is triggered, you can't get another one for 8 seconds. However, if you use up dream points upgrading a Whim skill, that refreshes the cooldown, so you need to wait another 8 seconds after that to get an Aftershock again. There is no cooldown on upgrading Whim skills, but to be honest that's a bad thing, as you can burn through dream points very quickly. With Aftershocks doing way more damage than any upgraded Whim skill ever could, and Whim to Harmony type upgrades effectively delaying Aftershock attacks, you really want to avoid spending dream points on Whim skills whenever possible. More than damage though, the reason you want to have Lucia use Aftershocks is because they are responsible for activating and refreshing her other buffs, Darkbreaker and Dreamer's Nursery Rhyme. Darkbreaker is what gives a Sheer Force buff, and if Lucia's additional ability is active, provides an extra 30% crit damage on top, lasting 20 seconds. With her additional ability needing either a Rupture or Stun character, and Lucia effectively never being run outside of Rupture teams, means this is an easy criteria to meet. You may notice that Darkbreaker isn't necessarily giving 900 Sheer Force, and this is because it scales with Lucia's pre-combat HP, so that's the number you see on her base stats menu sheet. By default, Darkbreaker only gives a laughable 12 Sheer Force at base, but for every 200 points of HP that Lucia has, that value increases by 7.4. So in total, Lucia will need to have 24,000 HP to get the full value out of it. This is quite steep. In fact, even with her signature, you will likely be running 3 HP% drive disks. Although I should remind you that this is the creator experience server, and with it comes a few kinks to iron out. You may have noticed that the description for Darkbreaker is nested under Lucia's EX Special. Indeed, using EX Special will only apply Darkbreaker, and nothing else. The remaining buff, Dreamer's Nursery Rhyme, is what provides a 20% damage bonus stat, lasting 12 seconds. Lucia's score description mentions that when she triggers a skill upgrade or an Aftershock, all squad members gain the Dreamer's Nursery Rhyme state. But in reality, skill upgrades or Aftershocks will trigger both Darkbreaker and Dreamer's Nursery Rhyme. And that's because the description of Darkbreaker lies. It's not when Lucia uses this harmony, it's any harmony or Aftershock. With Aftershocks having an 8-second cooldown, it's possible to maintain 100% uptime of both buffs with it. That is, if you're able to constantly stay in the dream state. This is another reason to not spend dream points on skill upgrades. Both skill upgrades and Aftershocks consume 25 dream points, which means you get about 4 Aftershocks per dream state, assuming no skill upgrades. For once, having a Zazbal cooldown on Aftershock is a good thing. The faster you spend resources, the faster you need to swap to Lucia to get back into the dream state for buff upkeep, taking time that could be more productively spent on other units. And despite Lucia having multiple ways to build dream points, getting back to the dream state is most often going to be limited by Lucia's resources. Her buffs are going to be more valuable than any personal contribution she brings. One thing that must not be forgotten is that Lucia is a support agent for Rupture teams. What I mean by this is that she has energy, not adrenaline, and most importantly, does not have sheer force. Since Lucia is most likely going to run triple HP% drive disks, the damage from her attacks is usually going to be, well, terrible. It isn't all bad though, as she has a nifty little bonus. On her EX Special description, it says that when this harmony deals damage, Lucia increases the final attack's damage by an additional 70% of her max HP. Another reminder that this is the creator experience server, because in fact, what it's meant to say is when a harmony deals damage. and the Aftershocks count for this too. If we do an assist follow-up, and not an EX special, the first few hits are doing 485 damage, with the last hit dealing 9,334 damage. Now we increase Lucia's HP a little, and the first few hits still do 485, but the last hit goes up to 12,224, an increase of 2,890, with all other damage numbers remaining the same. Keep in mind that this is a fixed increase based solely on a percentage of Lucia's max HP. If we go to Aftershocks, we see the exact same increase applied equally. Duelahan's last hit is doing 12,753 in damage, with the same HP increase as before, and it now goes up to 15,643, the same 2,890 difference. Regardless of the move's damage multiplier, the last hit of any Harmony attack or Aftershock gets increased by the same amount. This is applied based on Lucia's combat HP and as a bonus to the base damage, and not as a separate multiplier. So defense, resistances, crits all matter, and buffs like Ether Veil Wellspring, Darkbreaker, and Dreamer's Nursery Rhyme all contribute to having it hit harder. The damage is still quite low, but over the course of a run it can add up. What's important though is that this damage bonus only applies to Harmonies or Aftershocks. Try it with Whim attacks and there's no benefit. Which means that almost all of Lucia's skills are terrible to use. We've already gone through how upgrading Whim attacks in Dream State isn't usually good, so when in Dream State, just Aftershock. When out of Dream State, use whatever will build up the gauge fastest to get back to it, which is almost always going to be an EX Special into Basic 5 combo. You see, EX Special will shortcut straight into Basic 5, with 60 Dream Points from EX and 40 from Basic 5, that's the 100 needed to immediately get back to Dream State. Doing anything else is usually a waste. If we go through Lucia's kit, it's mostly unremarkable. Her full basic attack string takes quite a long time, so without shortcutting to Basic 5, it isn't worth it. Her dodge counter will never see use, as she's almost always going to be in the back lines. Her quick assist is more of a hindrance than a boon. As it's a Whim skill, it drains Dream Points when in the Dream State and delays Aftershocks. Outside the Dream State, it's rarely worth the effort, as it's difficult to make use of its 20 Dream Point generation. Her assist follow-up though can be decent. It's no Nicole, but it's so fast for the days it builds. The issue is that in most fights, letting the Rupture or Stunner unit parry would play out better, although there is a use case on feeding her parries for Decibel buildup. Not like that's unique to her. It does generate 40 Dream Points, but again, it's quite hard to make use of, especially as it relies on enemies attacking when Lucia is out of the Dream State. The regular special deals no real damage and only generates 20 Dream Points, but it's actually pretty handy. This is because it's one of the fastest heavy attacks in the game, allowing for highly efficient double chain use. But because it does consume Dream Points, doing so will mean exiting out of the Dream State faster, so be mindful of this. Chain attack is decently fast, but like with assist follow-up, its Dream Point generation isn't particularly useful. As it needs the enemy to be in the stun state, or have unique mechanics like Astra's ultimate, it won't usually line up. And the characters you'd be running Lucia with, namely Yixuan and Manato, rely on chain cancels for their combos, so it's unlikely it will ever get used. Doing a quick assist, then a special, then a chain attack only leaves you with 80 points, still 20 points short. And with a 5-second cooldown on quick assists and specials, you're effectively locked out of Dream State until it's up. This is why the Dream Point generation from dodge counters, quick assists, specials, assist follow-ups, chains, heck, almost her whole kit, isn't all that useful. So the 60 Dream Points from her reacts is a big deal, and since it shortcuts to Basic 5, it's the only thing you ever use to get into the Dream State. With the exception of Ultimate, which is really strong. We've covered how it will instantly put Lucia into the Dream State if outside of it. Heck, it does even if inside, due to allowing Lucia to instantly re-enter it after it runs out, which means you only want to be using Ultimate in Dream State if you can help it. As it only extends Ether Veil Wellspring duration when used in the Dream State, it can make the already easy task of managing it even easier. There are some extra fancy things about it, some useful, others not so much. If you hold any directional input when using Lucia's ultimate, its duration is extended by up to 3 seconds as a summoned Ruthless Fiend charges according to your commands. Lucia is not invulnerable during the charge, but she is immortal, an important distinction. She'll only take 40% less damage, but cannot be taken below 1 HP. Unfortunately, that's about it. The damage multiplier on the charge is pretty low and in no way justifies how long it takes. The end result is an extension that looks really cool, but is utterly impractical. What is practical is the little area of effect puddle that's left behind after. Whenever the active character is in the puddle, they'll heal for 1.6% of Lucia's HP every second. If they leave the puddle, be it by moving out or expiring, the effect lingers for another 4 seconds. But if the character is swapped out and is no longer active, the healing stops immediately. So reiterating here that it's the active character. Lucia will not benefit from her own healing after she swaps out, and certainly not when she comes in to do an Aftershock. Still, getting a heal for your active character is a big deal, especially for units like Manato, who uses his own health as a resource and can struggle in keeping it topped up without external help. So between the quick assist prompt, automatic dream state re-entry, Ether Veil Wellspring extension, and healing AoE, it's a good skill. Considering EX into Basic 5 and Ultimate are the only skills you'd be manually using on Lucia, it's no wonder they're good. Despite Lucia not having all that many good skills, the random Aftershock selection scaling means that you can't weasel out of having to invest in her skills. The most important would be her special and core, as Darkbreaker scales with special and Dreamer's Nursery Rhyme scales with core, not to mention the stat increases like energy regen that it provides. Following that, it depends on who you're playing her with. When alongside Manato or Rupture agents that need healing, Ultimate is good to help with their rotations. Otherwise, Basic and Assist in equal measure to increase the Aftershock damage from them. Dodge can be left out one, as it's seldom used and does not contribute to Aftershocks. With all that we covered in mind, we can go through how to play Lucia, and turns out that there's not that much that needs doing. In a way, she's a bit of a flowchart character. Step 1. Position yourself in such a way that you can go straight into Basic 5 just as combat begins, getting a fast entry into Dream State and buff activation from her Aftershocks. Step 2. If you're not very high on energy, do not use EX specials while in the Dream State. That way, when Lucia runs out, you can do an EX into Basic 5 shortcut to immediately get it back up. Step 3. When Ultimate comes up, use it while Dream State is active for a free refresh. If at any point Lucia is at the risk of overcapping on energy, it's fine to throw out an EX during Dream State. And that's it. Avoid using Whim skills during Dream State and pocket EX specials so quickly get back to it once it's over. Well, it's not just that. You do want to be using EXs every 25 seconds to sustain Moonlight Lullaby. The first Aftershock happens as soon as you enter Dream State, so that leaves you with only 75 Dream Points for 3 more Aftershocks. Since they happen every 8 seconds and each costs 25 Dream Points, that makes the first Dream State cycle 24 seconds long. Realistically, it may be longer, 26, 28, a bit more depending on how frequently enemies are being attacked, but still, that's far more than enough to maintain 100% uptime of Ether Veil Wellspring and Moonlight Lullaby. Further cycles will take longer, at least 34 seconds. Both delays between Aftershocks adding up, boss mechanics, and refreshes from Ultimate. After the first EX into Basic 5, you might only need to refresh Dream State once or twice over the course of a whole fight. So that affords you plenty of time and resources to use EXs in Dream State after the first refresh to maintain Moonlight Lullaby. With an energy regen engine like Game Ball or Kaboom the Cannon, or Lucia's signature, then even with a triple HP % setup and drive discs, you have so much energy that you need to use EX specials in Dream State anyways just to avoid overcapping. So buff maintenance really isn't a problem most of the time. I do want to emphasize most of the time, because there are situations where the other buffs, Darkbreaker and Dreamer's Nursery Rhyme, may need a bit of attention. Take Manato for example. He's a character that likes double chains, and Lucia is great at triggering them, be it with special or EX. Special is insanely fast, but that consumes Dream Points, which means you're cycling faster. If you don't have energy for EX special after exiting Dream State, then that's a problem. Normally that wouldn't matter as Lucia has more than enough, but since Manato's chain places him so far from enemies, their range on Lucia's specials and EXs are the only readily available heavy attacks that could reach, and you don't get to choose which to use if you have the energy, so you may find yourself coming out of Dream State without the energy to refill it. There's also the more advanced level of gameplay where days thresholds become important, and you may want to pocket EX special instead of using it straight away. Astra and Pan both have very limited days build, which makes them a pain in some fights, namely Miasma Priest. The difference in score between getting Miasma Shield to pop before and after the second stun can amount to tens of thousands of points, doubly so with the buffs that will come in rotation, like Pinnacle, which increases stun damage % multipliers. The thresholds are quite difficult to meet though, and often require special gimmicks, like making use of Yixuan's Auric Array's Vital View to hold Miasma Priest in place to afford your team enough time to build the days. With Yixuan, Fufu, and Astra teams, it often still isn't enough, mandating out-of-stun ultimates to keep Miasma Priest locked down. It's to the point that Qingyi is arguably a better stunner for the fight, simply because she makes skipping Miasma Shield and getting 4 stuns a lot easier. At times like these, the days contribution that Lucia brings to a team can be surprisingly helpful. Her total days contribution really isn't any good. In fact, her Aftershocks do 0 days, nothing at all. She's comparable to Astra in that aspect. Her EX special, however, can build a decent amount of days, more than Pan's EX special and his Touch of Death follow-ups combined. If you do an EX special into a basic 5 shortcut and it's almost 50% more. Granted, Lucia's days build is terrible and a 50% increase for terrible is still terrible. But pocketing EX specials and using them and basic 5s, even if it's while in the dream state, can be the difference in critical periods. Other than that, there isn't much in the way of tech. Her EX special looks like a projectile, but it triggers chain on the very first flash, where it functions like a melee attack rather than a ranged one. In fact, this actually ruined a lot of my runs, as the EX would build up days and start stun, but only after the first hit trigger had passed, meaning no chain prompt. So despite having multiple buffs, one of which introduces a brand new mechanic to the game, randomly selected aftershocks, in-depth resource management, and even attack extensions, Lucia ends up being a remarkably simple character, where all you do is keep her dream state up and occasionally think about where to slot in her reacts. Not like that's a bad thing, she sure looks cool while doing her thing, and it gives you the ability to focus on your other units. But now at least there aren't any funky animation cancel text like we see with Astra, or weird parry interactions of the sort we've gotten with Yuzuha. But you never know, there's always something to discover. When it comes to her build at least, there isn't all that much to investigate. With the only source of quick assists coming from entering the dream state and using ultimate, Lucia isn't getting anywhere near an Astral voice set. So a 4-piece Moonlight Lullaby it is. As a 2-piece, this can be a Yunqui Tail set for HP %, Swing Jazz for energy regen, or even a damage set like Woodpecker Electro. With how HP % does increase Lucia's damage via the fixed bonus on harmonies, a 2-piece Yunqui Tails is a safe bet. Since Lucia needs 24,000 HP to max out Darkbreaker, getting that is the priority. So stats-wise, even if you have Lucia's signature, which provides HP % as a main stat, you're likely still going to run HP % on D4, 5, and 6. If you don't have Lucia's signature, then you're nearly guaranteed to need all 3 HP % discs and the 2-piece Yunqui Tails. No wiggle room there. Well, there is wiggle room, but that's going to depend on how many HP substats you've got. Thanks to Fish, who has made a handy little chart on this. If we consider 1 HP % as 2 subs and a flat HP as 1 sub, without Lucia's signature, even with all 3 HP % discs and the 2-piece Yunqui Tails, you're still looking at 20 HP substat rows. Other than Lucia's signature, I wouldn't recommend an HP % Wenjin as it wouldn't come close to alternate options. On the topic, her signature, Dreamlit Hearth, is incredibly strong. It gives 25% damage bonus and 15% combat HP for 45 seconds whenever ether veils are activated or extended, so permanent uptime. It also provides an unconditional 0.4 energy regen per second to Lucia, a fair bit less than a D6 or an energy regen Wenjin, but given that it has an HP % main stat, it makes building Lucia a lot easier and still affords more than enough energy to maintain buffs. So it can allow you to drop HP substats and push for crit or attack, or if you're lucky enough to have godly HP rolls, perhaps even entertain the idea of an energy regen D6. To be honest with how saturated damage bonus can get, the real power on this Wenjin lies on how it further enables Rupture units. Rather than 900 Sheer Force, the 15% combat HP, coupled with a 5% increase from Ether Veil Wellspring, means that the total value can go up to almost 1,300 Sheer Force. That's more in Sheer Force than Astral Yuzuha offer in attack. Other Wenjins are just the standard support variants. Game Ball is the best alternative, as always, but limited strictly to Ether weak enemies. This is fine against Miasma Priest, and most bosses in the game are Ether weak, but the incoming 2.3 boss won't be. No spoilers here, we'll cover it in another video. Other options really boil down to Kaboom the Cannon or Weeping Cradle. Kaboom the Cannon will have constant uptime given the frequent aftershock use, but it does suffer as combat attack doesn't translate all that well to Sheer Force, so Weeping Cradle can be competitive, or even pull out ahead than Kaboom if sitting on dupes. It does have a limited uptime of 3 seconds every 8 seconds, but if you can work with aftershocks so they happen in line with your burst, it gets pretty strong. As usual though, its energy regen only applies off-field, so it stops when Lucia comes into aftershock. From my personal experience, when factoring in buffs like Gathering Point, having well-timed ultimates, and making use of Miasmic Shield resource refunds, I didn't struggle with having enough energy to maintain Dream State, even at P1, but your mileage may vary. So the safe option is Kaboom, with Cradle as a strong alternative depending on the fight and phase level. None of the other options are particularly good. Any HP % Wenjin will be worse than whatever buffs are given them by Kaboom or Cradle, and the other S-rank support Wenjins offer nothing of value. Elegant Vanity needs Quick Assist, which Lucia has barely any of, and Metanuki Morphosis enhances Anomaly Proficiency. Since Sheer doesn't seem to apply to anomalies, it's worthless. Even though Lucia is an Ether support, the Volt is a terrible choice. Without Energy Regen on D6 and no real Linger on EX specials, there isn't enough uptime on its buff to justify it. And being an Ether support for once does not necessarily make her good with Ether units. You aren't going to be running Lucia with Yixuan for one. Lucia's teams are very limited. With only 2 Rupture agents, teams are just Lucia, Rupture, and Filler. So either Yixuan or Manato with a stunner or support that works with the comp. Best pick currently is Fufu, but Qingyi, Trigger, Kaleda, Pokra, Astra, Pan, and so on are all fine. With Idari on the horizon, it's very likely Lucia will be her best partner, but for now, there isn't much variety for her. Which does mean she's in a bit of a weird spot. As it stands, she just doesn't have that much to work with, but as we get more Rupture agents and content tailored for them, Lucia's value will increase. At the very least, she's absurdly busted for what she does. So let's have a look at some runs of Miasma Priest on both Yixuan and Manato to see what she's capable of. With how difficult getting kills has been as of late in Deadly Assault, I had just about resigned myself to kills on the 2.x bosses being limited to Mindscapes only. Yet with Lucia on the roster, an M0P1 Yixuan Fufu team was killing so easily that even with failed combos, missed defensive assists, and terrible luck with parable attacks, it was dying with time to spare. 63,000 not from lack of damage, but lack of performance points. So I had to challenge myself to do so without Fufu's mention and, well, it still died pretty darn easily. Had I not messed up the combo at the end, that'd have been a kill with 10 seconds to spare, with awfully realistic substats too, having Yixuan at 35 and Fufu at 30. To be fair, this does ride on the Pinnacle buff, which is absolutely cracked, so Lucia's performance will certainly take a hit without it, but even then, she's still miles ahead of Astra for Rupture teams. Manato getting 45,000 is surprising too, especially with how scuffed the run was and how awkward a lot of the character skit is, but we'll talk more about him in another video. So why not like, share, subscribe and ring the bell to be notified for when it drops. I've got more videos coming. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.